Is it time to boost your company's revenue by going after commercial customers or getting your B2B business development plan back on track? Whether you're just getting started going through a complete overhaul or revamp, here are some things to consider. In part 4 of this 5-part series, we're going to get even more clear on our messaging.
Running a service business can be hard. It is not unusual for business owners in industries like contracting, home repair, auto repair, business-to-business services like janitorial, IT and accounting, and many others to feel overwhelmed by all the priorities facing them at any given time. Between addressing the needs of the customers, managing the employees, figuring out the financials, and getting processes in place, feeling like you're making significant progress on your business journey can be difficult. Welcome to Service Industry Success, hosted by Brian Harding. Each week, Brian will look at real-world strategies for building the business you are dreaming of, while also sharing tactics to get through some of the most frustrating parts of business ownership with a lot more ease. Let's get started.
A few years ago, I don't know if it was many or just a couple, don't remember the exact dates, but there was a study done on 10-minute TED Talk retention. So the study was, if there was a single topic for a 10-minute TED Talk, what was the audience retention like? How much of the talk did they remember? And so what they found was immediately after, again, this is a single topic, 10-minute TED Talk, immediately after, 50% of the content was remembered by the audience. The next morning, only 25%, and a week later, it was down to 10%. Now, we all know this is pretty accurate when we hear that data. None of us is probably thinking, people probably retain way more than that. If anything, we're probably saying the opposite. Like, what? They remember 10%? That's shocking. But when it comes time for us to explain or articulate something, we just can't help ourselves. It feels really helpful to keep adding more information and keep supporting our point with more and more data, more talking points. But people can't remember all the great points we want to make. Further, in the context of trying to go out and find customers and develop relationships with people and get them to call us instead of brand X, it can confuse the buying decision. The more quote unquote supporting points we make, the more it kind of can confuse the buying decision. As a sales manager, it was fascinating to go out on sales calls and watch the reactions of prospective customers when salespeople would do this in real life. Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting I'm immune to this. On the contrary, I'm at least as guilty of doing this as the average person. What I gained from seeing this happen in real life, in real time with a salesperson and me as a sales manager riding along, watching conversations with prospective customers, it helped me immensely. I mean, what I saw, it really helped not only with my own sales conversions, but also helping salespeople get better. So what I'm describing here is a situation where a salesperson, again, when I say salesperson in the context of this series, I don't mean an estimator transaction salesperson. I mean a business development salesperson, an outside salesperson who goes out, finds prospective customers, build a relationship in the hopes that they start using our company. So that's what I mean when I say salesperson in this series. I remember a very specific incident where the prospect met with us. We had made an appointment with her. Me and the salesman, in this case, went and met with her. And he had done a great job of making the case to call us instead of brand X. And you could see the prospect. She was nodding and agreeing, just like you would draw it up on the whiteboard, like, here's how we want it to go. We're going to meet with her and she's going to listen, and then she's going to start nodding and agreeing, and then she's going to say yes, And all that stuff was happening. And then it all changed in just a few seconds. I say a few seconds, it wasn't like 3 seconds, but over the course of a minute or two, probably, it all changed. She was no longer nodding and agreeing. She was like pondering, considering. You could almost see like she was weighing the decision out, like it was like watching somebody do a mathematical equation. And ultimately, we walked out the door without a commitment, and we didn't end up getting the customer. So what happened? Well, I'll tell you in just a minute. First, if you want help with your business development, B2B business development program, you want to get going or make it more productive, I'd invite you to come check out my group called Business Tips, which stands for Business Tactics and Immediate Problem Solving. For less than $100 a month and only 2 Zoom meetings a month to attend, you'll have a place to get immediate answers to questions you have and shorten the learning curve from the experience of other business owners. It's an ideal place to work through the challenges you're facing with properly allocating your salesperson's time or your own, if you're the one out there beating the bush, creating and improving your compelling message, learning your customers or buyers' decision-making process and criteria, tracking, reviewing sales activities, manage your team, and all the other related challenges you have. Plus, you'll learn tips and tricks I've picked up over the years from personally generating over $40 million in revenue from business development and managing teams of people who've been responsible for another 40 million. To join, just go to joinbusinesstips.com. That's joinbusinesstips.com. All right, so what happened on our sales call? How do we go from getting buying signals to doubt and then ultimately losing the potential customer? It's simple to explain, and it was easy to see in real time. The salesman, as I mentioned, done a great job of getting the customer to see that we knew the problem, acknowledge that we had legitimate solutions for that problem that the prospect wasn't getting from their current provider, understanding that making the switch to us be relatively painless. But then the salesman in this case, kept talking. And he went on and on. And I don't mean he went on and on for like an uncomfortable period of time. It wasn't like it was an awkward conversation, but he went on long enough to add new decision making criteria to the equation. And one of the things that I got accustomed to saying as a sales manager, teaching this and helping people with this, again, not saying I'm immune to it, I'm not, was that what I witnessed in that encounter was he had made the case and she was agreeing, and then he kept trying to make it better. But what he wasn't making it better, he wasn't making the pitch better, he was making it different. And I remember when I first started doing this podcast, I talked about a friend of mine who's he does painting just for fun. He doesn't like sell them or anything like that. He enjoys painting, and he does like landscape paintings. And he had a saying that he said this, I don't know, 25 years ago, and it's always stuck with me. He was talking about how you finish a painting. Like, it's not like paint by numbers where like there's somebody telling you. Like, he's creating this, he's imagining it, or he's at a place painting what he sees. And he talked about how he would know he was done. And he said there's a point where you stop making it better and you just start making it different. And that's the point where I know I'm done. And that is how I used to explain this to people when I was a sales manager. Was there's a point where you add enough information where you're making the case better. But then there's a point where you're adding enough information where you're not making it better, you're making it different. If you go through a 10-minute sales spiel with somebody and they're nodding and smiling and you just keep talking, you can't keep saying the same thing over and over again. So you say different things. Well, those different things now are creating a different story. And it's a different criteria and different factors and all that kind of stuff. And that's exactly what I saw in this case. She went from nodding and smiling when it was one thing to confusion, and we lost the sale when it was many things. So had he had he just locked in on that singular problem she wanted to solve, we would have been fine. But when he had done a good job of getting that singular problem where she agreed with that, he kept adding more what felt like supporting information and more benefits and this and that. But the additional information was not supportive, it was confusing. It complicated the decision by adding new factors for the prospect to weigh. The salesman literally talked him in himself into and out of the sale. I mean, just a few minutes. We're talking like 4 to 6 minutes where he had talked himself into it and talked himself right back out of it again. And because too much stuff had been thrown at the prospect, it's unlikely she remembered any of it. Again, remember our TED Talk retention study. So if you took that situation where he talked himself in the sale, out of the sale, and you fast forward a week for that particular prospect, I don't think she would even remember the 10% because it was confusing. So what is my point? Well, my point is we need to know, as we discussed in the last episode, and if you haven't listened to the other episodes of the series and you're interested in getting your B2B and your commercial sales stuff up and going, I would really recommend you go back and listen to those earlier episodes. As we discussed in the last episode, we need to know what our potential customers want. And we also need to know which of those wants is the most compelling and that one thing we're going to focus on. They can learn all the other great things about us once we get started, once we get working together, or once we have the first order, or like whatever. They can learn the supporting things as needed. And if they have questions, they're going to ask them, and we should certainly answer those. I'm not saying we would ignore things they bring up or not answer questions. I'm not suggesting that at all. What I am suggesting is when I go knock on somebody's door and I want them to become a customer, I need to know what's my hook? Like, what's my one thing? What's the one thing I believe that they're going to care about? What's the one thing they're not getting they wish they were getting, or the thing they have to deal with that they wish they weren't? And we need to know that with a high level of certainty, like what's the one thing they wanted the most and how do we provide that better than other options? Another way to frame it is if we had to choose, which we do because our brains can't remember everything we would like. Remember the 10% retention for the TED Talk study. If we had to choose, what is the one thing we want them to remember about us a week from now? So it's not a matter of trying to find creative ways to get them to remember more than they're going to. They're not going to remember more. But again, I know in the moment it doesn't feel like that. The moment it's like, well, of course they're going to know all this great stuff about us. Of course they remember these 12 things or 4 things, but they don't. Our brains aren't wired that way. They're going to remember about 10%. So what do I want that 10% to be? It better be the most compelling hook. And also, by the way, without the hook, how am I even going to get their interest? So this is the hook is really meaningful in both. Sometimes it's the hook is what helps them decide to even set the appointment with us if we have to set appointments for our prospective clients. Sometimes the hook is beneficial in getting past the gatekeeper, but also the hook needs to be the thing that they're going to remember, right? So I want to implant the hook that will come to mind when they think of us later on. And as most things I've talked about in this podcast, essentially, I need to know what's in it for them to remember me and our company. It's a matter of knowing that one thing that's going to stick with them a week from now. So if I speak to 100 prospects in a month, a few will remember more than that 10% average from the TED Talk study. But I don't believe that I'm going to get anywhere close to even half of them to remember considerably more than that 10%. A few are going to remember a little more and a few are going to remember a little less, but it's not like I'm going to have some magical way to get a high volume of people to remember high volume of the things I talk about. I just the studies don't support that. In my experience, doing sales doesn't support that. I don't ever remember going back to a prospect who said yes and said, "Man, I'm so glad I saw you because you mentioned these 14 things or 7 things, and they were all awesome." Like occasionally you'll get somebody who mentions a few or a couple, but almost always it's the singular thing that people cared about that we landed on that got them to say yes. So I suggest for all of us, we need to be intentional about the 10% we want them to remember. And it better be the most important one, right? So the hook we focus on will perhaps or even likely differ from industry to industry. What I mean by that is if I'm a marketing agency and I work with a wide range of clients, my contractor hook is probably not the same as my hook for a dress shop. They have different needs. It's different worlds. Doesn't mean I can't know both. It means I better not take the dress shop hook to the contractor and vice versa. So it's going to change if you're working with a wide range of industries. It's going to change from industry to industry. Now, if for our company, we worked with, a handful or a couple of handfuls, maybe of industries, and how I talk to people in hospitals was not the same way as I talk to people in restaurants. They had different pains. They had different problems, and so my hook was not the same for the hospitals it was for the restaurant. It also changed over time as our company grew. Our hooks changed. The benefits of working with a small company are not the same as working with a medium-sized company, and they're not the same as working for a large company. So as our company grew, our hooks had to change with the size of our company to make it for us to be a compelling option as the things that we offered and things we were really good at changed. Also, our relationship and awareness in the industries we serve changed. As we got more immersed, our hooks were less about breaking in and more about continuing the established relationships we'd already built. So our hooks changed. Our talking points had to change to keep up as we got more immersed into those industries. And the priorities and pain points of our customers changed. So our hooks had to change and our talking points had to change to keep up with that. The problems people had in 2021 are not the same as they have coming into 2025. They're a little bit different for everyone. And so my hook and my talking point needs to keep up with that. And of course, prospects, if they're interested, will bring up pain points or ask questions that may be different than what I had planned on when I walked in the door. Like, I'm going to go talk to a restaurant and I walk in thinking, okay, here's the hook I've been using that is landing with most people. I know this is a pain point of theirs. And they throw a curveball at me and they say, what about this? This is the thing I really care about. Well, boom. Of course I need to address that. I'm not suggesting I would ignore them and focus on the hook I have prepared. If I find that this particular prospect has a pain point that's a little different or whatever, I might pivot and address that point. And that becomes my hook. But in all cases, the more information I leave them considering, the less likely I am to be memorable and the less likely they are to find us unique and more attractive. And I also will point out that at times I found myself using this, kind of a shotgun approach with selling points. meaning I walk into that restaurant and I fire a whole bunch of reasons at them that they should choose our company and hope one lands. The reason I did that is because I didn't really know the criteria my prospects were prioritizing when they made decisions. So I threw a bunch of stuff at them and I watched and saw which one landed. But later on, when we really knew our customers, I didn't do that at all. I knew exactly there was, one, two, or three things that people cared about, and I focused on the one that I knew was the most likely. And if they said something to tell me that something else mattered, then okay, then I would pivot, of course. But I had to have that stuff ready to go, because if I'm standing in front of them, not knowing, I'm just firing off random things, I'm in trouble. So in short, the more I had to offer a wide range of reasons, that meant the less I knew about which reason mattered most. So what do we do now? Well, we talked in the last episode about, let's make a list of the things that our prospects want, what our perspectives want. There's probably a handful. There's probably not 24. There's probably 5 or 6 things that they really want. And then let's learn which of those that's compelling enough problem for our prospects to make a change, and that we're really good at solving. And if we have those 2 elements, they really care about this thing enough to make a change, and we're really good at it, like, holy smokes, that's a great hook, right? So that's kind of how it went for us. Again, the shotgun approach, in hindsight, I was doing that because I didn't know any better. I didn't know what the pain points were. When I knew the pain points and we stopped throwing a bunch of stuff people, we focused on those 1, 2, or 3 things, which, when I say 1, 2, or 3, I mean, it varies from industry to industry. The more singular I was, and here's the reason you should call us instead of brand X. Here's the thing to remember a week from now, the more successful we were. And so if you don't have a hook, especially if you have salespeople going out representing your company, what in the world are they saying? Right? We need to have an idea of what our prospective customers want, what they would change, why we have a great solution for that, and be focused on the thing we want them to remember us by. Right? So a reminder, go to joinbusinesstips.com to get immediate help with launching or rebooting your B2B or business development plan from someone who's been there. Also, if you find the information I share helpful, please share this podcast with a friend or colleague you think can benefit from it. Of course, public sharing is also appreciated. And that's it for this week. I'll talk to you all next week.